Welcome to another episode of Compassionate Coexistence, a podcast to help you cultivate connection and honor Earth. I'm Lex Silvie, your fellow traveler on this journey toward hope, healing, and harmony for all beings. Today, we have another sanctuary spotlight that focuses on honoring the rights of all beings. Our teacher today is the Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge in Pittsboro, North Carolina, that has a mission to provide lifelong care to rescued farm animals, educate people about the realities of animal farming, and promote veganism by offering knowledge, support, and community. The 45-acre sanctuary is home to more than 100 rescued chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, sheep, goats, and cows, all of whom are permanent residents. The refuge was awarded the 2023 Outstanding Sanctuary Award by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, in part for an innovative feature called animal-centered design, which we will be hearing more about today. Today we're talking with the sanctuary's founder, Lenore Brayford, who has a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Oberlin College and who interned at Farm Sanctuary, Woodstock Farm Sanctuary, Pig Pals, and the Carolina Tiger Rescue before founding the refuge in 2012. And also with Paul Drake, the sanctuary's head of construction design, who has a master's of architecture from NC State University. Lenore and Paul, thank you so much for being here with us today for the Compassionate Coexistence project. I would just love to hear you share a little bit about your connection to animals and when it started, and then how this took off and became like a passion, and later this amazing sanctuary that you have for animals out in Pittsboro.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, like many children, loved animals, never really knew anything about, how animals were treated in the food system. So for me, it was in college when I was studying environmental studies and starting to learn about factory farming for the first time, where I was frankly shocked to, learn about how so many animals are living every day hidden from us, and the amount of suffering and the terrible things that happen to them. So that was for me how it started. And it's interesting because there are not a lot of environmental organizations that do talk about the issues of factory farming as much as they really should. But yet, that's actually where it was from an environmental lens where I started to learn about that system for the first time. So I'm very grateful for my time in college and getting exposure to that so that I could make choices that were in alignment with my values, because I was really very unaware of those things beforehand.
Yeah, I think I read that it was a philosophy class. Can you just talk a little bit, Lenore, about that assignment and what you learned, and like making
Mm-hmm.
the decision right then to stop eating animals, if I remember correctly? Can you share a little more about that?
Yeah. So initially, I became vegetarian just from being exposed to the idea of factory farming through my general environmental studies. But then specifically, I took an environmental philosophy course, and I was randomly assigned to debate that it was ethical to eat animals and their products. And so that part was really key because I started to learn more about the egg and dairy industry and come to realize, there's actually so much more suffering going on in those industries than you could argue in the meat industry, and that eventually all those animals are killed in the end of the day anyways. And so learning about that and basically trying to come up with moral reasons why it would be okay to support those things and engage in those activities, um, was such an important exercise because most of us don't know about much, let alone think kind of deeply about these things that are just ingrained in our society. They were all just grow up doing. So that was a real opportunity for me to look inward. And I always say, like, I lost the debate, but the animals won because I convinced myself to be vegan at the end of that. And so, yeah, it was a really important thing for me to go through.
Wow. I know I've part of this project is looking at green building and more environmentally friendly ways of existing. And it's surprised me too that there has been such little crossover from the animal welfare protection. I just went in assuming like people who care about one would care about the other. And
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely those people out there, but it has surprised me that there does seem to be a disconnect between environmental protection and animal protection. And they're so intertwined, like you said, that it's
Hmm.
fantastic. And did you two meet at college? Is that where your love story began? Like, Paul, please let me, please like clue me in on your side of this too, because you're doing incredible work for animals.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually met on the first day of college. It was really awkward because our parents actually met each other first. And we all sat down and had lunch together, and Lenore and I were at the opposite ends of the table, both being kind of like introverted and just staring at our food the whole time. But we slowly warmed up to each other from there.
Wow.
And yeah, I was not, I never really thought of myself as an animal person, although I did have, animals in the house, cats, growing up that I really liked. But I, um, I went vegetarian in college, thanks a lot to Lenore's influence. And after college, I actually, we were overseas in New Zealand and Australia, doing a program called Willing Workers on Organic Farms.
Okay.
And we were going to all sorts of different farms. We would stay a week in each place. It's kind of a work trade situation where they give you housing and food, and you do a little bit of work for them every day. Um, and we wanted to go to all sorts of different types of farms. And one of them that we went to was a organic dairy farm in
Mm,
New Zealand. And it was the most beautiful location to be a cow, I think. It was the same place that Hobbiton from the Lord of the Rings was filmed.
okay.
And it looked like that too, just rolling hills of green everywhere. And I was under the impression that that milk from like organic milk came from happy cows. Um, and so we were there to kind of test this idea. And what we learned really just it blew my mind. I did not know that cows had to be impregnated every 6 months with artificial impregnation, um, to give birth in order to have milk constantly. And then what happened to all the babies was even more surprising. The male calves were just killed, um, pretty soon after they were born, which I had no idea. And then the other babies that weren't killed, um, they were separated from their mothers, and um, in order to give them milk, they didn't just get the regular milk from their mother. They got the mastitis milk, which is the infected milk from that they couldn't sell. The farmers couldn't sell. So that's what the babies drank, and so all of that was enough to convince me to go vegan.
Wow. Yeah, I think, and thank you for speaking to that because I think, and please feel free to like speak to the cruelties and the hidden realities because I think a lot of people are now aware of like factory farming and slaughter, but I don't think that there's necessarily as much understanding around the inherent cruelties, like you said. I know one thing that really surprised me with organic was like they can't use antibiotics. Like even if the cows do develop mastitis, which, for people who don't know what that is, it's like that very painful inflammation of the udder. um, they can't be treated, so these poor cows just have to suffer through having this infection, because of the standards that are out there. So I think that and I love you have a position statement on that, that there is no quote unquote humane slaughter. There is no, quote unquote humane animal exploitation. Whether that's cows or I know like the backyard chicken industry with Robbie, is that how you say his name? I want to talk
Yeah.
to you guys about him, but I know that is another, and just veering a little bit, but the deeper you two got into this, were there other realities that maybe had been presented to you throughout your life as harmless or natural, quote unquote, that the animals just lay 100 eggs a year or whatever it is, and then when you started looking more into it you realized that maybe this isn't the truth, maybe the truth is something completely different.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the concept that, cows make milk, chickens make eggs, is just something you grow up learning, and you don't really think about the history of how did we get to this place with these animals. So some of the first chickens we took in were from an industrial egg facility. But over the years, we've also taken in many individuals from like small, local, organic egg farms. And we have a chicken right now named Laurel who was part of one of these cases where it was, again, a small, local, quote unquote, humane facility. And after a couple of years of feeding them and taking their egg production naturally starts to go down. And the chickens were just deemed invaluable. And so they stopped feeding them because they didn't want to put the money into that. And by the time the neighbors figured out what was happening, they had been consuming their feathers from their own bodies and from bodies of other birds because there was nothing else to eat. And luckily, the neighbor saw what was happening and was able to get them to safety. And we took in a large number of them. And it was really sad to see, no tails and all these, naked areas on their bodies because they were essentially starving. Luckily, one of our volunteers was a sewer and made them little custom jean jackets out of like old jean pants to wear because they needed to have those areas protected and covered for warmth and for healing. And so they were able to make a wonderful recovery with us. But yeah, it's a lot of times people will imagine, this wonderful, peaceful existence for these animals, even on the small farms. And really, that's fairly far from reality. And I think the bottom line is if an animal is being used for a product, that is an exploitative relationship. So as soon as the profit is going down, then the animal's best interests are not going to be taken into account, whether that's giving them medical care or, keeping them healthy and alive past their point of, quote unquote production. And that's something that we try to talk a lot about here at the refuge because you're right, there are more people who are luckily aware of the industrial agriculture system now, but there's still the use of animals that we are advocating that is inherently amoral, and we don't want animals to be exploited and used in any way.
Yeah, that was an excellent summary. Thank you for that, and what strikes me too is what you were saying, like the end goal, like you don't necessarily see that in animal agriculture. I'm thinking like chick hatching projects where it's like you see the cute little fluffy chicks, but you don't see what happens to them, Paul, like you were saying with like, okay, here's this green organic dairy farm in New Zealand, but what's happening to the babies? Like, do people ask those questions? So yeah, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about your sanctuary, because I think what you just pointed out that from what I read, they're all permanent residents there. Like you give them lifelong freedom and safety, and everything about the sanctuary seems very geared towards their needs and their wants and giving them like a good quality of life. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your mission there and what you're trying to help educate people about. And yeah, let's start there because I have lots of other questions too.
Yeah. So our mission is to rescue farmed animals from abuse, neglect, and abandonment, and to educate people about the farming industry, as we were discussing, and also to promote the idea of veganism, vegan living, through different activities and programs that we have, whether that's like free community potlucks to just expose people to, a community of people and delicious food, cooking classes, giving out free samples. And as an organization, we strive to be a very welcoming place to everybody. So we don't have a policy where you have to be vegan to come here or to volunteer. And we also really try to encourage people to be curious and ask questions. And we always say there are no stupid questions, because a lot of what we learn about these animals is just wrong. And, the whole thing, you know, cows don't just make milk on their own, they have to be pregnant. Um, you know, we want people to discover and be curious and learn more. And so we try to make it a place where people feel like it's a safe place that they can ask those questions and kind of grow as individuals.
Yeah, and we've kind of discovered this, the fact that it seems we're taught that farm animals are just kind of simple and dumb. There's a lot of kind of um, myths about that, and you know, we here at the refuge like to um, we really like to investigate who the animals are and try to just start from a fresh perspective, not think about what we've learned in the past about these animals. And really, if you do that, there's so much to learn. Every day we're learning more.
Yeah, I know when I started volunteering pigs, I had never seen a pig. Like I just never had. I grew up in like suburbia, and the sanctuary director was like, "Well, give them a belly rub." And I'm like, "How do I do this? Like what is going on?" And the pig just flopped over and like started making happy grunting sounds. And I was like, "This is the most amazing experience like of my life," right? Because it's
Mhm.
you learn how intelligent they are. And yeah, I would love to hear a little bit more before we get into like the animal centered design, since you brought up like learning about them and what they need. Um, I'm just so inspired by the fact that you learned about a farm sanctuary, Lenore, and then it's like you had a years of interning and exploring the concept, and then like you did this. Like I don't know if people realize how hard this is to like not only to keep it running, but also just to find the land, and then you've expanded recently as well. So can you just tell us a little bit about that journey of like here's this new concept of a sanctuary. This is something that I might want to do. And then you made it happen. Like, can you just talk
Mhm.
to us a little bit about getting the land and then doing all the research and then bringing Paula in with like the animal centered design? Just tell us how you started and grew and where you all are now.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think that the fact that I did a lot of other internships and had experience at other animal sanctuaries was one of the most important things that set me up, you know, to do well with the refuge in so many different ways. And one really crucial way is thinking about, you know, the long-term sustainability and how many animals you can realistically take in. Because we and all sanctuaries are contacted on a daily basis about animals in need. And we want to rescue all of them because, you know, we want to help an animal when we hear about them being in a bad situation. But of course, we couldn't do that and exist for very long or have the animals under our care have a wonderful quality of life. So that's a constant,
Mm.
you know, difficulty. And being involved with other sanctuaries in the past and actually hearing about some cases where, okay, this facility is shutting down and the animals need a place to go. There's not enough room for all of them. So some of them are being euthanized, but the ones that have space are going to get placed. That really made a big impact on me and thinking not just about how many animals we take in, but you know what is the financial stability over time, and who's involved in taking care of the animals, and what if one person gets sick or gets burned out. And I think it's just been the basis of a lot of my thinking is wanting to make sure that when we are taking an animal in, we are making a promise to them that we're going to care for them for their whole life. And by the way, that can be up to 40 years if you're a goose, 25 if you're a cow. So it's a serious commitment. And I take that very seriously. I don't ever want to be, you know, in a situation where we are forced to close down because of funding or, you know, too many animals or, you know, all the different reasons that sanctuaries close. So I think that past experience is vital. And there's a lot of people that I've talked to over the years who want to start a sanctuary. And I always tell them that like experience is the number one thing that you can do, because you're not only learning about running a nonprofit and running an animal sanctuary, but you're also learning about yourself. And you're, after doing this work for a number of years as a volunteer or as an intern or even on staff, you really find out if this is something that you're cut out for, both physically, emotionally. There's just so much that goes into it. So that hands-on experience is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah. And so, like, where did the land come from? Because from what I was reading, it seems like North Carolina has huge animal agriculture, and you might even be like sandwiched between some of these industrial facilities that are doing some really
Mm-hmm.
heinous things to animals. Like,
Yeah.
how did you decide on the land? And I'm just interested, like, I know the outside world receives you well, but were there tensions or challenges, or was it
Hmm.
difficult for you to kind of explain to your neighbors like what you were doing there? Just would love to hear about some of the nitty gritty of, like,
Mhm.
I'm sure it wasn't all roses and butterflies when you started.
Yeah. It turns out that our sanctuary is about 2 hours away from the largest slaughterhouse in the world, Smithfield, which is in Tar Heel, North Carolina. But it was kind of originally somewhat by chance that we ended up in North Carolina, and then, wanted to start a sanctuary here just for other life reasons. We came down here. But it turns out that this work is so vital here in North Carolina because of the level of agriculture, both industrial and small scale. We're number 3 in the country for number of pigs that are being raised for food. So I'm glad we are where we are, even though we are kind of in the middle of it. Um, when we were looking for land, it took us almost a year to find the right piece of property. And it just involved a lot of persistence, because we wanted to find something that was a mix between pasture and woods to accommodate the needs of our animals. We didn't want to like clear cut a forest to create an open space and disturb nature in a huge degree. So when we got the property, that's when we were really able to start doing some of those formal things regarding setting it up with the county. And like you said, with the neighbors, one of the things we had to do for the county to accept us was invite all of the adjacent property owners to a meeting to let them know what we were doing. And then basically they would then know that they could go down to the county and complain if they didn't want this to happen in their backyard, or that the county would take their considerations into play. um, and we didn't get too much pushback. One of our neighbors was really concerned if we were going to have peacocks, because they were really worried about peacocks landing on their front porch. And another neighbor was worried about what was going to happen when the animals died. He didn't want them just laying around in a field and contaminating his well and all of this. So these were easy things to kind of clear up with our neighbors. And really, we haven't gotten a ton of pushback in over the years. I think, especially in the early years, we were more under the radar. I think now we are a little bit more known in the community, and we have a big road sign and all of that. But we've been fairly lucky. People, for the most part, have been kind and interested and supportive of what we're doing. So.
Yeah. How
Yeah,
did you?
and um, you know, Lenore, mostly Lenore, went through that whole process with the county of trying to get this place approved. Um, and that's a really important thing, we think, to when you're starting a sanctuary, is to make sure that it's an approved use of the land by your county, because the last thing you want is for them to come in one day and say, "Oh, you're not allowed to do that here." And we've heard of that happening. So that's an important thing to make sure of if you are thinking about starting a sanctuary.
Yeah, I think knowing your rights. I mean, there's definitely not manuals. I mean, Open Sanctuary Project is an amazing resource. I saw some of your presentations on there, and wanted to mention that for anyone who's listening. But there really aren't many manuals out there for, like, how to do this. And I'm just even wondering with permits, like when you did start doing your animal center design, I want to give you space to talk about it because I think it's one of the things that makes you all so unique. Um, yeah, just tell me about that process. Like, did you go to Lenore and talk to her about wanting to do this? Um, or as you were looking at building plans, did you just like not see anything that you felt would make your residents maximally happy? Like, where did this come from? Because this is so unique and fantastic, and I don't think people know what it is. So maybe just start by telling us like what it is and all the good details about how it developed.
Sure, yeah. So we started um, the idea of animal centered design when I was in a master's program for architecture at NC State, and I was in my third, going on my fourth year in that, and I was trying to find a subject for my final project, kind of my thesis project. And it was just at the time when Lenore had started the sanctuary and was wanting to build some housing for goats and sheep. So I was able to convince my professors that um, my final project could be on designing and building the goat and sheep houses for the refuge. Um, and this, to me, this was great because it was a way that I could apply what had learned in school and design and have something actually come out of it that doesn't just get thrown in the trash like all of the other designs in design school. It's so much hard work, but you don't really see anything that benefits the world from it. So this was it was a great opportunity for me, and that through that process, the research process, I was able to um, learn what I could from readings and also visiting goats and sheep and just learn as much as I could about them because they were my clients. In school, we always had human clients for all of our projects, but here I had animal clients. So I just had to learn as much as I could about their lifestyles. And the idea was to just create spaces that were tailored specifically to that species and their way of being. And that's basically how it started.
Nice. And I know I love the goat houses because I am fascinated by goats. I love all animals, but like the farmed animals definitely have a place in my heart. And I remember the first time I saw a goat in a tree and I was like, oh my gosh, like how did that happen? Because like I've never thought of that. So yeah, the goat houses, they have 3 levels there, right? And they allow the goats to like climb up into them and then they can bunk there and be more secure because they're like higher up, like just some of those things. Are there other specific features of the community that you're really, I feel like every single enclosure that's on that little interactive map you have on your website, which is super cool, which I will link to, just kind of explains like how some of these features you have on the land, or even like Lenore, you had mentioned earlier, wanting woods and pasture. Um, because I think we see farmed animals in the pasture and like the idyllic portrayals and not really think like, where did these animals come from? Like, what would make them happy? What kind of habitats do they prefer? So, anything either of you would like to add just about the unique features that you got there?
Yeah. Along the lines of what you're talking about, one of the things we learned about chickens is that they descend from the red jungle fowl, who is from Southeast Asia. And we were surprised to learn this is their descendants are jungle birds from the rainforest. So we'd always seen these pictures of chickens out in green pastures, um, you know, um, pecking around in the grass, and this is so not what their instincts are. They want to be undercover. They want to be in a forested, lush environment, and they want to be on the forest floor digging away mulch, that mulch layer, and trying to find bugs and things like that. That's where they want to be. Um, so over the course of about 10 years, when we built our chicken house in 2014, over the last 10 years, the area around it has started to grow up. It was originally mostly pasture, a little bit of woods, but we've allowed a lot of plants that just came up naturally to grow, bushes and trees. And we also planted a bunch. And it's become so much more like the environment that they want.
Mm.
And um, we've seen such a difference in their behavior, especially in the summertime when it gets hot. They used to all just huddle inside their house, and now they're always out. There's always things to do. There's always shade to be found out there, and also they get a sense of safety from predators, especially aerial predators, being in the cover of the bushes and trees and things.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's amazing. And before we get into like a typical day, because I do want to hear about like what your your typical day is there, but I just love to focus a little on the why, like when you look at the tragic reality for most animals who are used in the food system, this is so much extra work just to give them a place to live where they can be themselves and be free, and to keep it running and to really focus on them as individuals. And I mean, I clearly get it. I love animals and I believe they deserve that, but I'd love to hear from you both about why they deserve that. I mean, in a society where, like we were talking about earlier, they're often just seen as commodities or as means to an end. They're in these horrible industrial or even just small scale operations where they can't even express natural behaviors. Chickens might not be able to take a dust bath, which is so important to them. Or, pigs might not be allowed to wallow. They might not even be able to turn around in some of these states with like gestational crates and things. So, why go to all this extra work, and maybe talk a little bit about your understanding and reality of animals since you deal with them every day and you've created this space where their true colors really can shine.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's some of those things that you said. We do live in a world where they are viewed as commodities, as just things, but they're not. And when you are put in a situation where you can actually meet them and learn about who they truly are, and you were saying that you had never met a pig before. There are very few safe places in the world for these animals where they are relaxed enough to actually be themselves and do things like trust humans enough to flop over for a belly rub. So to be exposed to that and see these animals and realize that they are not that different from cats and dogs and other animals in our society that do have limited rights and are viewed as parts of the family, then it's just simply the right thing to do. And I think also this issue and the fact that these animals are used for food, there are steps that every individual person can take on a daily basis that can impact that. So, like, we may be overwhelmed by a lot of the injustices and the issues that are in our world, so many different, social justice problems. But like with this issue, like you can have an immediate impact by learning about them and changing your, habits and what you are supporting with your dollars. So I think that is something that is also an important part of what we're doing here at the refuge, is encouraging people, educating people, to see these animals as individuals. And we have many people that come here who have never met a turkey, or never met sheep in person, and then they get to meet Blackberry and he's climbing into their lap during a tour and giving out his hugs and being his wonderful self. And it's not only a safe place for the animals to live, which I think in and of itself is a valid and a wonderful thing, but it's also a place where people can actually meet these individuals and see them in a a location where they are themselves and they're happy and they're free. And it's really important, I think, for people to care about these animals, learn about them, and care about them. And if you've never met somebody that's different than you, and you don't have any kind of personal connection or relationship to them, then it's really hard to care. And so that's another part of our mission with our, tours and our other public programs and even our volunteering, getting people connected to these animals on a one-on-one basis, is really important for ultimately helping more of them in the long run.
And I think we're also taught just implicitly through our culture that, some animals are just more important and more worthy than other animals. And when people come out to the refuge and get a chance to meet a goat or a cow, that's just in a loving environment where they're valued, it's a really eye opener for people, and so that's one of the things that we provide here.
Mm-hmm. You have to see what is possible, right? What is a model of what maybe the future could be for these animals, to be able to envision it, to have an example there, I think is really important, because like you said, the majority of these animals are living in terrible conditions, and so how they're being treated and where they're living affects how we value them and how we see them as individuals. And I think that's also where animal-centered design not only comes in to benefit the individual animals who are living there, but also to influence people who are like, oh, their houses are different. Why? Oh, look how they're like being treated, and they are the clients. It gives people a different framework for how they start to value these animals.
Yeah, and I feel like you and other sanctuaries really have your work cut out for you on so many levels, because a lot of times people that I know, it's like they only have seen animals in exploitative lights, whether that's like blatant, like at a circus, or it's a little less blatant, like a bunch of cute baby goats or sheep in a petting zoo environment. It's like, well, where are their moms? Like, what's going on? And we normalize these behaviors that are not humane or healthy. Um, and I do want to talk with you both about what a true sanctuary for animals looks like, because you have it there. And your policies regarding like public interactions with people, or we talked about how they have forever homes there versus like being adopted out, or just like the enclosures with the animal center design where their needs are first. It's not like, oh, well, this is like the best view for the people to see the goat. This is like, no, the goat wants this. um so yeah, can you just talk a little bit about like a true sanctuary for people who maybe haven't been to a real sanctuary?
Mm-hmm.
Because we definitely don't want people to listen and be like, oh, I'm going to take my kid to the county fairgrounds and we're going
Mm-hmm.
to go like see these sheep, or like just maybe some
Mm-hmm.
red flags to kind of like let people know like this is not a true sanctuary, or
Mm-hmm.
alternately just how you both have defined sanctuary, and you ensure that, yeah, people are coming here, they're learning about the farmed animals, but the farmed animals needs, they're still first, so that it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't cross that line into exploitation.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that all animals who live at the refuge may not want to interact with humans, and they may want to interact today, but tomorrow they may not. So recognizing them as individuals, seeing that, and making sure that the environment and the expectations of visitors are set up so that if an animal wants to come over to a person or to a group, they can. If they want to move away and be in a private area, that is also an option for them. Is super important, because a lot of these other places that you were mentioning, like petting zoos or like zoos or pseudo sanctuaries, the animals can't move away from the public eye at all. They're either in like small enclosures, or the enclosures are designed so that the public can view them or interact with them. So that's a really important part of what we do, is giving the animals choices and as much of a sense of agency as possible. I think one of the challenges with a sanctuary is there is always a balance between freedom and safety. because ultimately for the species that we take care of, they're all domesticated and they cannot just be released and go out and live in nature. Unfortunately, at this point in time, they cannot survive, and there's a certain amount of care that they need and that are required. So the question is, how do you provide them as much of a naturalistic environment so that they're not just sitting around with nothing to do all day in a small little pen, um, but also have it be a safe place where they're not going to get into trouble or get hurt. Um, and so that's always, those are always things that we have in mind, you know, on a daily basis, and then particularly when it comes to with animal centered design is, I think one of the main goals is trying to give them as most of a natural experience as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the avian flu is another big one that's been a challenge for sanctuaries. Like when I was saying, the balance between safety and just their freedom. Because with avian flu, there is, you know, if birds have any connection to the droppings of wild birds, they can contact this disease, and so it's, the avian flu kind of comes and goes with the seasons and with locations, but it's something that sanctuaries now have to pay attention to and decide whether they're going to let their birds be outside or if they have to have protective cover and things like this. So that is a big challenge these days with sanctuaries as well.
Yeah, and I think it really highlights too. I just know millions of birds have died in really horrific ways when one catches it. Like if one catches it, then I think it's called like ventilation shutdown, is how the majority of industrial ag will
Mhm.
just put them in a barn and crank up the temperatures and let them slowly die. And it's like that doesn't necessarily make the news. Like the news might cover this was the loss to this corporation, but you're not, again, you're not seeing. There's just so many layers that, you just don't see. But yeah, I want to get into your actual residents because they're darling. And I would love to start just with your first rescue, if you mind if we veer. Just what was it like taking in your first animal? Tell a little bit about him and like what he taught you because he seems incredible. And yeah, I just, does that adrenaline rush from like the first rescue ever go away when you get those calls and it's like, can we take more? And I would just love to hear a little bit about your residents and some of the ones that people really seem to connect to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our first rescue was a rooster, and his name was Robbie. Um, his story is extremely common. So people bought baby chicks to have in their backyard, and one of them ended up being a male instead of a female. And the local city ordinance doesn't allow roosters because roosters crow all day and they're considered a noise nuisance in a lot of more urban areas. And so, in his situation, it was interesting because it was not an individual family, but it was actually a cooperative community. And so they have these meetings where they vote on things, all the different goings on in the co-op. And so they had a meeting to discuss what would happen to this rooster. And like half the group wanted to just put him in a pot and be done with them. And the other half said, wait a minute, we need to find him a safe home. And so luckily that half won. And we were able to take Ravi in as our first rescue. I'll have to tell you a true story that's embarrassing, but when I went to go get him, I was nervous. It was my first time being there. And also, some of the other co op members had said, well, you better come quick because I'm not sure that some of the ones that wanted to eat him are going to like wait. So I was like rushing, and I arrived at this community and it was kind of like he was, coming out and does anybody else seeing him leaving? And in the hubbub of all of that, I had put him in the car. This was in the middle of summer, and I locked my keys in my car with Robbie in my vehicle. And so it's hot, and I'm like, I'm gonna kill this very first animal that I have taken in, because I was so nervous and there was just so much going on. But luckily, I called and somebody was able to open my car very quickly and we made it home safely. But Ravi ended up living with us for about 8 years. Um, he had a love affair with an older hen named Esmeralda. That they were very bonded and connected, and she passed away from heart failure way before he was really even considered to be elderly. And he did make some connections with other hens after that time, but really it was never the same as him and Esmeralda's first connection. And he ultimately also died of a heart condition, which I find to be very ironic. But he was a wonderful individual. He would definitely treat different people differently. And that's something that we see a lot here. People will, in our world, we tend to just put blanket statements out like roosters are aggressive, or, goats are curious, or things like that. But really, each individual is so different. So, like, we have one of our roosters, Charleston, just wants to be cuddled all day long. Robbie, it would depend on who you were. If sometimes you would go in there and he would not like certain volunteers or certain people coming in as a potential threat to the flock, and he might be a little bit protective of the flock, and other people that he trusted, you could pick him up and carry him around, and he would have a different relationship with. But yeah, he was a very special guy, and it was lovely that he was able to be with us for as long as he was. So we definitely built a bond over those years.
Yeah, that's cute. And like the other animals you have there, like, can you just briefly speak about like where do they come from and like how do you decide which ones to take in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, they come from all sorts of situations. Some examples, a lot of our sheep residents came from a butchery that was shut down by law enforcement due to extreme neglect. Some of our goats are from similar situations. Some are just homeless or actually abandoned at shelters because it's becoming more popular for people to buy farmed animals like pygmy goats and put them in an urban backyard when really they don't have the proper facilities or setup. So there's a lot of individual people getting animals and then realizing that they're not equipped to take care of them, and then dumping them at the county shelters or releasing them out into the wild. A lot of our ducks come from those types of situations where they were somebody's beloved pet and then just left out to die, on a pond with wild ducks where obviously they can't survive due to their domestication. Also, you mentioned the hatching projects. We have a number of ducks from those, and we've had some really good conversations with teachers who have moved away from these models because they're now realizing, well, what happens to these baby ducks or baby chicks after my hatching project is over? And, their fate is not good. And so, kind of putting those dots together and realizing this isn't a good practice is really it's nice to see when your efforts are actually making change. Um, but yeah, one of our we have an aviary for chickens who have disabilities, and so one of them is a little white chicken named Hope, and she was actually in a truck on the way to slaughter and fell off. And this is what happens to a lot of these animals who end up at sanctuaries. It's like an accident or a tragedy that is actually the best thing to happen to them. Like another example, we have a bunch of chickens who came from an industry giant industrial warehouse that was hit by a tornado. But in Hope's case, she fell off and was laying on the side of the highway, unable to move, and somebody was driving and just pulled over because they saw an animal and realized it was a chicken. And so when she came to us, she couldn't lift her head up, she couldn't open her eyes, and she had massive head trauma. Um, and really, it was touch and go whether or not she was going to survive. And we had to tube feed her and give her fluids for about 2 weeks. But what happened is she started to slowly show signs of life where she would open one eye and look at us for a little bit, and then she would go back to her sort of dormant state, and then she would open the other eye. And she started to slowly eat. And I remember she took a couple bites of sweet potato. That was the first food she ate for us independently. And we knew that she was on the good road. And so eventually she was better enough to go outside and meet other chickens and be with them. And what was wonderful but also sad about that is that for Hope, it was the first time that she was actually on grass and in a natural environment. So witnessing that and seeing her, scratching and doing all the things that chickens are supposed to do, was like a joyous moment, but also it's sorrowful to think of all the other animals that are living in these warehouses and never see the sun and never feel the grass and never get to do any of those natural behaviors, which are so very basic, to them. So that's the story of Hope.
Wow. That gives me goosebumps, she sounds like a sweetheart. I'm going to look her up after we talk. Thank you for sharing that. And I know I could talk to you for hours, but we're coming up on the hour. So again, I want to be mindful, but kind of Lenore, along that note, before I started volunteering, I just did not realize the toll on so many emotional levels that the sanctuary work can take, from being exposed to the realities that we were talking about earlier, to caring for animals past their, quote unquote slaughter ages, when they're still babies, but then they develop all these crazy health problems because a lot of times they've been bred to be bigger than their bodies can support. Or like you were saying, it's just like you have to spend intensive time with these animals, never knowing if they're gonna make it. There's, I'm sure you have more that you could tell me about, but how do you two cope with that? Like knowing that you're helping, but also knowing that all this other stuff is in the background, and
Mm-hmm.
what keeps you both going to continue doing such important work for animals and for people?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, in the scope of the animal rights movement and the work that people are doing in different avenues, being at a sanctuary, we do get to be on the side of victory and, animals recovering and for, hopefully for the most part, going on to live long lives. And so we get to have a lot of success stories and triumphs. And I think that is really important because there is so much suffering and it can really impact you mentally and emotionally to like think about the number of animals in those situations. So to get to be a part of one individual's, liberation and rescue and then see them living happy, I think is extremely important, for people who are doing this work. But you're right. Sanctuary work is also comes with all of these heartbreaks and is inherently really difficult. I think that always doing the best that you can for an animal and knowing that you left it all out there and is something that I always try to do. And even when an animal is coming towards the end of their life and it's sad, sometimes there's a feeling of accomplishment with that. Like this animal lived in far beyond what we ever thought they would, even in a sanctuary. And look at the beautiful life that they've had, and look at what we've been able to help them achieve. So there is, some pride and some sense of accomplishment from that, even through death. I think ultimately it's really important to take care of yourself and be compassionate towards yourself to avoid things like burnout and compassion fatigue. I think having a life outside of this work is very important. And for us, because we live at the sanctuary, sometimes we physically need to leave and take a vacation and a break. And, that was hard in the early years because we didn't have a very big staff, and now it's more possible. So I think all of those things are important to remember too, that even though animals need us every day and there's so much suffering out there, is that if you want to be in this game for the long haul, you do have to take breaks and take care of yourself and do other things outside of the animal rights movement.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly hard for the animal caregivers, which used to be mainly Lenore, although I would help some too. Um, it's especially hard with animals that are bred in such a way that they tend to live very short lives, especially the chickens that come from the factory farm situations. Um, the odds are kind of stacked against them from their breeding. And in the early days, when it was mainly Lenore taking care of them, I think it was particularly hard for her because when they suddenly pass away and you don't even know why, um, it you somehow have guilt there, um, and I think over the years having more people join the animal care team that can have eyes on all the animals and come to decisions as a group. That's helped. Although the you know it's still tough when these animals pass away suddenly. Um, so it's something that I think a lot of sanctuary founders and animal caregivers have to deal with. And it's good to have a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a memorial area as well, which is important for that community where, we have a yearly ceremony, we gather and we remember animals that we've lost over the year, and then we'll hang a medallion for them, and then that's always there. So we are honoring them even after their death, and we know that they're not forgotten. Um, and that's symbolically important, I think, for me and for a lot of people here at the refuge.
Oh yeah, and I think it goes back to what you're saying, that they're individuals, right? It's not just okay, they're dead and now they're gone. It's they were valued, honored, known members of your community. And I think the fact that there is that memorial to honor them and to hold space for the lives that they lived, I mean, I think that's very beautiful. I always go to memorial gardens because I'm like, this is beautiful. Like this life mattered to so
Mm-hmm.
many people. It wasn't just a nameless thing that was thrown out in the trash. It's like this animal lived a good life, a long life, a happy life, and that's beautiful. I mean, I think that's magical. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And just final question for you both. Do you have any final thoughts, just like main takeaway messages from this conversation, or the work that you're doing that you think is important for people to take away? Or what's next for you? I know there's a lot of exciting things. You have a documentary that's coming out, which is like I'm eagerly waiting to watch. And I saw some little possible pig homes in the future. Like you guys have a lot going on. Just and how people can follow you. Like, please just use our final minutes to talk to any of that you are excited about.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the biggest ways that you can help us and other sanctuaries is by supporting. So whether that's through donating or volunteering your time, or sharing the work with other people in your circles, you know, the fundraising aspect and just, keeping everything going is a struggle that all of us are going through. But yeah, for us coming up, pigs are on the horizon. We are actively in what we call the pig planning stage, and we are going to be launching actually a fundraiser shortly for phase one of our pig habitat infrastructure. So we're very excited about that. We have over the years been slowly adding species and growing our sanctuary over time. And so having that extended acreage, as you were mentioning, is a big reason why we're able to move towards pigs and start taking them in. And it's so important here in North Carolina. As we were saying, there's over 8 million pigs who live in our state. But you can be in North Carolina your whole life and never see a pig because of how they're housed and where they're housed. So talking about these issues with the members of the public, whether it's, how the animals are treated, but also how these industries affect all of us through environmental and social justice issues, is so important. So we're really excited to be able to move towards taking in pig residents.
And yeah, that the design for the pig habitats and housing is one that I've been excited about for a really long time, because pigs are so intelligent, and they have a strong relationship with shelters. In the wild, they'll actually build their own shelters. And they also have other projects that they do, like digging wallows as a community, and things like that, that just make them so interesting. And it's just really rich for a designer to think about, how a pig might want to live. So I'm super excited about that. And for anybody wanting to start a sanctuary or just wanting to learn more about sanctuaries, the Open Sanctuary Project website, I think it's opensanctuary.org, is a super, super nice resource that didn't used to be there, and we're also lucky that it is there now. They've got hundreds of articles on um, good best practices in sanctuaries and how to get started, and we've helped them on a few resources too. And what was the other resource? Oh yeah, if people are looking to, understand more about what a sanctuary versus a petting zoo or things like that. Of course, your other podcast, your previous one with Jess Harris, would be great. And then also just the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. They do great work in accrediting sanctuaries and, applying a standard of care, or upholding a standard of care for sanctuaries. So that's a great resource too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
and our website is piedmontrefuge.org if you want to check out the interactive map or see what's happening with the pigs or the documentary or any of that. We would love to have you check it out.
I absolutely loved centering in Lenore and Paul's respect and honoring of farmed animals as the intelligent, unique, and precious individuals that they are, and also how the refuge's animal-centered design helps people realize that farmed animals are those individual beings who have an inherent right to live their lives in peace, happiness, and maximum freedom. You can find links to the references in this podcast episode, as well as the refuge's website and social handles in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time to travel with me today. May any words or wisdom that resonated stay with you and grow in the upcoming days. Till next time, stay wild and rooted in compassion.